The Federal Reserve is privately owned by Thomas D. Schaaf. The Federal Reserve Bank is a private company. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution states that Congress shall have the power to coin, create money, and regulate the value thereof. Today, however, the Fed, which is a privately owned company, controls and profits by printing money through the Treasury and regulating its value. The Fed began with approximately 300 people or banks that became owners, stockholders purchasing stock at $100 per share. The stock is not publicly traded in the Federal Reserve banking system. They make up an international banking cartel of wealth beyond comparison. Reference 114. The Fed banking system collects billions of dollars. Reference 817. It interests annually and distributes the profits to its shareholders. The Congress illegally gave the Fed the right to print money through the Treasury at no interest to the Fed. The Fed creates money from nothing and loans it back to us through banks and charges interest on our currency. The Fed also buys government debt with money printed on a printing press and charges U.S. taxpayers interest. Many congressmen and presidents say this is fraud. Reference 1, 2, 3, 5, 17. Who actually owns the Federal Reserve central banks? The ownership of the 12 central banks, a very well-kept secret, has been revealed. Rothschild Bank of London, Warburg Bank of Hamburg, Rothschild Bank of Berlin, Lehman Brothers of New York, Lazard Brothers of Paris, Kuhn Loeb Bank of New York, Israel, Moses Seif Banks of Italy, Goldman Sachs of New York, Warburg Bank of Amsterdam, Chase Manhattan Bank of New York. Reference 14, P13, reference 12, P152. These bankers are connected to London banking houses, which ultimately control the Fed. When England lost the Revolutionary War with America, our forefathers were fighting their own government. They planned to control us by controlling our banking system, the printing of our money, and our debt. Reference 422. The individuals listed below owned banks which in turn owned shares in the Fed. The banks listed below have significant control over the New York Fed District, which controls the other 11 Fed districts. These banks also are partly foreign owned and control the New York Fed District Bank. Reference 22. First National Bank of New York, James Stillman National City Bank. New York Mary W. Harmon National Bank of Commerce. New York A.D. Gillard Hanover National Bank. New York Jacob Schiff Chase National Bank. New York Thomas F. Ryan Paul Warburg William Rockefeller. Levi P. Morton M.T. Pine George F. Baker Percy Pine Mrs. G.F. St. George J.W. Sterling Catherine St. George H.P. Davis and J.P. Morgan. Equitable Life Mutual Life Edith Brever T. Baker. Reference 4 for above. Reference 22 has details. P 92, 93, 96, 179. How did it happen? After previous attempts to push the Federal Reserve Act through Congress, a group of bankers funded and staffed Woodrow Wilson's campaign for president. He had committed to sign this act. In 1913, a senator, Nelson Aldrich, maternal grandfather to the Rockefellers, pushed the Federal Reserve Act through Congress just before Christmas when much of Congress was on vacation. Reference 345. When elected, Wilson passed the Fed. Later, Wilson remorsefully replied, referring to the Fed, "I have unwittingly ruined my country." Reference 17, P31. Now the banks financially back sympathetic candidates. Not surprisingly, most of these candidates are elected. Reference 1, P208, 210. Reference 12, P235, 2. Reference 14, P36. The bankers employ members of the Congress on weekends, nicknamed T and T Club out Thursday and Tuesday, with lucrative salaries. Reference 1, P209. Additionally, the Fed started buying up the media in the 1930s, and now owns or significantly influences most of it. Reference 310, 11, P145. Presidents Lincoln, Jackson, and Kennedy tried to stop this family of bankers by printing U.S. dollars without charging the taxpayers interest. Reference 4. Today, if the government runs a deficit, the Fed prints dollars through the U.S. Treasury, buys the debt, and the dollars are circulated into the economy. In 1992, taxpayers paid the Fed banking system $286 billion in interest on debt the Fed purchased by printing money virtually cost-free. Reference 12, P265. 40% of our personal federal income taxes goes to pay this interest. The Fed's books are not open to the public. Congress has yet to audit it. Congressman Wright Patman was chairman of the House of Representatives Committee on Banking and Currency for 40 years. For 20 of those years, he introduced legislation to repeal the Federal Reserve Banking Act of 1913. Congressman Henry Gonzalez, chairman of a banking committee, introduces legislation to repeal the Federal Reserve Banking Act of 1913 nearly every year. Is always defeated, the media remains silent, and the public never learns the truth. The same bankers who own the Fed control the media and give huge political contributions to sympathetic members of Congress. Reference 12, P155, 163. Reference 22, P158, 159, 166. The Fed fears the population will become aware of this fraud and demand change. We the people are at fault for being passive and allowing this to continue. Rep. Louis T. McFadden, our pa rose from office boy to become cashier, and then president of the First National Bank in Canton, Ohio. For 12 years, he served as chairman of the Committee on Banking and Currency, making him one of the foremost financial authorities in America. He fought continuously for fiscal integrity and a return to constitutional government. Reference 1. The following are portions of Rep. McFadden's speech, quoted from the Congressional Record, pages 12,595 to 12,603. The Federal Reserve Board, a government board, has cheated the government of the United States and the 3. people of the United States out of enough money to pay the national debt. The depredations and the iniquities of the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks acting together have cost this country enough money to pay the national debt several times over. About the Federal Reserve Banks, Rep. McFadden said, "They are private credit monopolies which prey upon the people of the United States for the benefit of themselves and their foreign customers, foreign and domestic speculators and swindlers, the rich, predatory money lenders. This is an era of economic misery, and for the reasons that caused that misery, the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks are fully liable." On the subject of media control, he stated, $500,000 was spent on one part of the propaganda organized by those same European bankers for the purpose of misleading public opinion in regard to it. Rep. McFadden continued, Every effort has been made by the Federal Reserve Board to conceal its power, but the truth is the Federal Reserve Board has usurped the government of the United States. IT controls everything here, and IT controls all our foreign relations. IT makes and breaks governments at will. No man and no body of men is more entrenched in power than the arrogant credit monopoly, which operates the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. These evildoers have robbed this country of more than enough money to pay the national debt. What the government has permitted the Federal Reserve Board to steal from the people should now be restored to the people. Our people's money to the extent of $1,200,000,000 has within the last few months been shipped abroad to redeem Federal Reserve notes and to pay other gambling debts of the traitorous Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. The greater part of our monetary stock has been shipped to foreigners. Why should we promise to pay the debts of foreigners to foreigners? Why should American farmers and wage earners and millions of foreigners to the number of their dependents? Why should the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks be permitted to finance our competitors in all parts of the world? Rep. McFadden asked. The Federal Reserve Act should be repealed, and the Federal Reserve Banks, 4. having violated their charters, should be liquidated immediately. Faithless government officers WHO have violated their oaths should be impeached and brought to trial. Rep. McFadden concluded. Reference 1 contains an entire chapter on Rep. McFadden's speech. If the media is unbiased, independent, and completely thorough, why haven't they discussed the Fed? Currently, half the states have at least a grassroots movement in action to abolish the Fed, but there's no press coverage. In July 1968, the House Banking Subcommittee reported that Rockefeller, through Chase Manhattan Bank, controlled 5.9% of the stock in CBS. Furthermore, the bank had gained interlocking directors with ABC. In 1974, Congress issued a report stating that the Chase Manhattan Bank stake in CBS rose to 14.1% and NBC to 4.5% through RCA, the parent company of NBC. The same report said that the Chase Manhattan Bank held stock in 28 broadcasting firms. After this report, the Chase Manhattan Bank obtained 6.7% of ABC, and today the percentage could be much greater. It only requires 5% ownership to significantly influence the media. Reference 14, P5657. This is only one of 300 wealthy shareholders of the Fed. It is believed other Fed owners have similar holdings in the media. To control the media, Fed bankers call in their loans if the media disagrees with them. Reference 25, P134-137. Rockefeller also controls the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, the sole purpose of which is to aid in stimulating greater interest in foreign affairs and in a one-world government. Nearly every major newscaster belongs to the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations controls many major newspapers and magazines. Additionally, major corporations owned by Fed shareholders are the source of huge advertising revenues which surely would influence the media. Reference 14, P5659. It can be no wonder why groups such as FedUp receive minimal, if any, press attention. How do taxpayers stop financing those whose purpose it is to destroy us? First, expose their activity, then demand change. The solution. Currently all we do is exchange Fed money, interest attached, for real US money, interest-free dollar for dollar as Kennedy tried to do. We should not be required to pay interest on our own currency. According to Benjamin Franklin, this was one of the primary reasons we fought the Revolutionary War. Today we are still fighting the same family of bankers. Reference 4, reference 1 P. 5. 211, 212. The U.S. government can buy back the Fed at any time for $450 million per congressional record. The U.S. Treasury could then collect all the profit on our money instead of the 300 original shareholders of the Fed. The $4 trillion of U.S. debt could be exchanged dollar for dollar with U.S. non-interest-bearing currency when the debt becomes due. There would be no inflation because there would be no additional currency in circulation. Personal income tax could be cut if we bought back the Fed, and therefore, the economy would expand. According to the Constitution, Congress is to control the creation of money, keeping the amount of inflation or deflation in check. If Congress isn't doing their job, they should be voted out of office. Unfortunately, voters can't vote the Fed or its chairman out of office. If the government has a deficit, we could handle it as Lincoln and Kennedy did. Print money and circulate it into the economy, but this time interest-free. Today the Fed, through foreign banks, owns much of our debt and therefore controls us. The Fed will cease to exist as taxpayers become informed and tell other taxpayers. The news media and Congress will have no choice but to meet the demands of grassroots America. Reference 1, P1722. America deceived. By law, check the congressional record. We can buy back the Fed for the original investment of the Fed's 300 shareholders, which is $450 million. Reference 1. P227, reference 17, P36. If each taxpayer paid $25, we could buy back the Fed, and all the profit would flow into the U.S. Treasury. In other words, by Congress allowing the constitutionally illegal Fed to continue, much of your taxes go to the shareholders of the Fed and their bankers. Note, the people who enacted the Fed started the IRS within months of the Fed's inception. The Fed buys U.S. debt with money they printed from nothing, then charges the U.S. taxpayers interest. The government had to create income tax to pay the interest expense to the Fed shareholders, but the income tax was never legally passed. Reference 20 shows details, state by state, why it was not legally passed. The Fed is illegal, per Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. Not one state legally ratified the 16th Amendment making income tax legal. Having violated their charters, should be liquidated immediately. Faithless government officers WHO have violated their oaths should be impeached and brought to trial. Rep. McFadden concluded. Reference 1 contains an entire chapter on Rep. McFadden's speech. If the media is unbiased, independent, and completely thorough, why haven't they discussed the Fed? Currently, half the states have at least a grassroots movement in action to abolish the Fed, but there's no press coverage. In July 1968, the House Banking Subcommittee reported that Rockefeller, through Chase Manhattan Bank, controlled 5.9% of the stock in CBS. Furthermore, the bank had gained interlocking directors with ABC. In 1974, Congress issued a report stating that the Chase Manhattan Bank stake in CBS rose to